Good evening, everybody, and welcome to tonight's event, EO Talks, a conversation with Nick Halla. Thank you so much for joining us. I see that there are still people in the waiting room. We're just getting ready to admit everybody now. Okay, so how this event is going to work for anybody who hasn't joined one of our events before. My name is Dina Robinson. I'm the managing editor at Earth.org. So I'm going to give a little explanation of Earth.org and then the Hive co-working spaces, and then we are going to jump right into the interview. So Earth.org is a not-for-profit environmental organization based in Hong Kong. We want to create visually compelling storylines to bring people closer to an understanding of what is happening to natural ecosystems worldwide. Specifically, we want to highlight the human-driven causes of natural environmental disasters and the climate crisis. Here's a video for a sneak peek of what goes on at Earth.org.
Humans are successful, a bit too successful. We are taking over too much land and too many bioservices. At the same time, we are wiping out other species of animals. We're extremely messy and wasteful. A byproduct of human activity is pollution and uncontrolled destruction. We are collectively laying waste to our beautiful planet. You can see the side effects of human success everywhere. The destruction of natural environments, polluted rivers, ocean plastics, smog, dying coral reefs, forest destruction, as well as almost daily animal species extinctions. Given the level of CO2 now in the atmosphere, we are looking at living in a 4-degree warmer world by mid to late century. Without altering our basic economic models to better value and protect the natural environment, we will destroy much of what makes this planet so beautiful. Forests, coastlines, wildlife, glacier-capped mountain ranges, coral reefs, beaches, all these will be damaged beyond repair. In a 4-degree warmer world, sea level rise will mean all beaches will be submerged. Coastal cities will be uninhabitable. Trillions of dollars of property will become worthless. Billions of lives will be put in peril. Not in 100 years' time, but within our lifetimes. Earth.org is a non-profit environmental organization based in Hong Kong. We aim to demonstrate what is happening to our planet with insightful articles and campaigns enhanced by data visualizations to make the consequences of human actions and policies starkly obvious. We use machine learning, computer vision, and data science to create our arguments. We use online publishing, social media, events to communicate to a wide audience. Our aim is to influence opinion and encourage the adoption of logical economic policies that are environmentally sound and which at the same time better protect the long-term welfare of human society. Policies that ensure the Earth can be managed by humans in a way that ensures long-term survival of the vast majority of animal and plant species without damaging degradation of our planet. By showing what happened in the past, what's happening now, and what is most likely to happen in the future, we can shine a light on just how illogical current policy making is. We believe our current pathway can be dramatically altered. Human ingenuity, resourcefulness, and effort can yet avoid a climate change-induced Armageddon. It's time to get involved.
Thank you, everybody. So this event is very kindly brought to you in partnership with the Hive co-working spaces, a place where passionate and entrepreneurial people can get together and share ideas while growing their businesses. The Hive has locations in Thailand, Vietnam, Japan, Australia, Singapore, and Taiwan. And we are joined today by attendees of all the Facebook pages of all the Hives. So thank you very much, the Hive, for helping to make this possible. But now the reason that we are all here tonight, Nick Halla is the Senior Vice President for International Markets of Impossible Foods, a company that develops plant-based substitutes for meat products. He has been instrumental in helping founder Pat Brown build the now world-famous Silicon Valley food technology. His vision to create a healthier and more sustainable food system without the current environmental impact has changed the global food production industry immensely. And I know personally, Impossible Foods has really helped me and a lot of people I know kind of embark on our meat-free journey. So very excited for this talk. Just before we get into the interview, we would like to remind our audience that there will be a Q&A session after this interview. So please feel free to pop your questions either into the chat box on Zoom or on Facebook, and we will be sure to field them to Nick. Nick, how are you doing this evening in still crazy times? It's bizarre how long I've been asking our guests that for.
I'm doing well. I think it's really, I'm really optimistic on all the progress that has been made over the last several months and getting systems with a light at the end of the tunnel towards back to normal. But yes, it's been a long journey. And obviously with your video, there's a lot of challenges that we have across the world, but I'm very optimistic in the trajectory of where a lot of things are going.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, 100%, and we're really happy that you could join us. So let's just jump right into it. So to start with, what made you decide to join Impossible Foods when alternative proteins, they weren't really as understood or as popular back then?
Yeah, so I joined almost 10 years ago now when Dr. Brown, Pat Brown was starting the company. My background fortuitously was actually quite aligned with what we're doing at Impossible, even though I've been kind of running away from that most of my life. So I grew up on a dairy farm in the Midwest in the US. So I was in agriculture, my entire childhood growing up. And then I decided pretty early I wanted to study engineering and use technology to solve problems. And so I ended up studying chemical engineering. Taught me a ton about how to tackle problems and hard problems, and just build the intuition and the scientific learning to think about things at all kinds of different levels. And had a lot of ideas what to do. Did research in renewable energy when I was an undergrad. I think growing up on the farm drove a connection in me all the way to the land and the environment from day one. And so as a farmer, our job is to produce good food for people affordably while maintaining our land for future generations. And you hand it down generation to generation as a family farm. And so I think that just always kind of resonated with me, that I wanted to spend my life working on the global environmental challenges that we have, use technology to solve that. Didn't have a clue, honestly, what to do with that coming out of undergrad and coming from a small family farm. So I looked at like big renewable energy lab, research firms and things like that. But I ended up taking a research job at General Mills, which is a food company, and designed new products and commercial systems for 4 years. Okay. Was great for learning how businesses run, but I wanted to do something much more impactful. And I didn't see it in food, and I didn't see it in agriculture at that point. And so what I did is I ended up going to graduate school, studied business and a master's in science and energy and environmental sciences, back into commercializing renewable energy. Tried to start 8 businesses of some sort of transportation, energy storage, power generation. Had some decent ideas that I think probably have some legs, and some actually did by other people, not me. But through that process, I ended up meeting our founder, Dr. Brown, through the venture capital community. And when I was in grad school, I realized a lot of these ideas and these big ideas that really change systems come from Silicon Valley venture capital professors, scientists who are working on new research that could solve big problems. And my background in food and agriculture really connected with a partner at the investment firm. And so when he was talking to Pat on this, I just, I was a pretty logical fit in some ways. And then once they invested in him, introduced me, I met him at a small cafe, started talking about the impact we can have with doing this. And at that point, I was working at a solar energy company. And I thought about this, and we started going through the statistics that animal agriculture uses 45% of all the arable land surface, more than 25% of fresh water every year, more greenhouse gases than all the transportation system. By far the biggest driver of species loss, if you look at the land intensification that we have mostly for agriculture. And so if we look at the impact by changing the system to a plant-based ecosystem, it's much, much, much greater than really any other industry. And I think at that point, there's probably 200 solar energy companies in California, and no one was talking about this. And we're starting it from scratch. And it was really exciting to think about this and looking at a system that is so fundamentally inefficient, where a cow is a 3% efficient technology of taking plants and converting them into meat. And so the opportunity is massive, and how much more efficient we can make the system, and then drastically reduce an environmental footprint. So at that point, I was like, all right, this is worth taking that leap, going for. And if it works, it's like the benefit we could have in changing our future generations' lives is massive.
So sorry. This is just a personal question. You said that you grew
Sure.
up on a dairy farm, and now you're in a business that is arguably looking to kind of reduce the impacts
Sure.
of farms like that. How do you kind of reconcile that? Like, is your family happy with you that you're kind of in the industry you're in?
Oh, it's funny. So after I talked to Pat about this idea for the first time, and it was like a total just an idea at this point.
Hmm.
And my first call is to my brother. So my brother is the farmer in the family. He's the one who wants to continue to raise cattle, like loves the farm life, never wants to like leave like a 5 mile radius spot because that's like his home, that's his land, that's what is really comfortable to him. And I raised this to him. It's like, here's an idea. It's totally different. And the statement I started with, what I learned on the farm actually mostly came from him.
Okay.
Our job as farmers and as a small family farm is to have a business that you can hand down to your future generations, which really doesn't work today in small family farming. Have a business that you are maintaining and actually hoping making the land better over time. And that also doesn't happen as we're really mining the resources to produce more and more food with such an inefficient system. And the job of a farmer at the end of the day is to produce good food affordably for people. And farmers are some of the most innovative, amazing entrepreneurs out there because it's like a startup all the time with very, very little money. And so you have to make anything work. And so I think that actually kind of resonated and kind of stuck with me as well. And so when we got to the family, as my family's like very, very supportive. I've had my cousins, my old neighbors, my grandparents, we did some stuff on their farm, my brother, all doing work for us early as we we're doing a lot of research because they thought this idea was so cool and how this could advance agriculture to the next phase.
Okay. I mean, that's fantastic. I mean, I'm sure that made you working at Impossible in the early days like so much easier having your family's support. But now, Nick, moving on to kind of the premise of Impossible Foods, what have you found to be the biggest challenge in convincing people to give up or even eat less meat? So, what is it about meat that makes people not want to give it up?
Yeah, so when we started the company, I will admit I probably ate meat pretty much every meal,
Yeah.
and probably meat or dairy every meal, if you include breakfast too. And that was just the way of life I grew up with. That was culture, and that's what I was used to. That's how you get protein-rich nutrients. And the first thing that it comes to is taste and experience.
Yeah.
And so we started the company. I remember going to Expo West, which is this big food exhibition in Los Angeles. And it's kind of like, the Natural Food Expo, and you have all the new brands, all the new products, all the new trends. And I knew there'd be a lot of these like plant-based, like veggie burgers and cheeses and things like that there. So I went there, tried them all. And I left after the first day and just like, I need to go get a good burger. I was like, I can't believe people eat this food. And like as a meat consumer, and a pretty avid meat consumer at that point, it was so different than the experience that I was looking for. And most people have had a veggie burger, whether it's black beans or mushrooms or something that tries to imitate meat in the past at that point. But it doesn't come close to giving consumers that experience that they love. And so when we got into it, we said we have to create products that meat lovers, the most avid meat lovers in the world, like better than what they get today from animals. And that's a big challenge because it's delicious. It transforms as you cook. So you can make it into meatballs, dumplings, well done burgers, medium burgers, and they're really, really different. And so it's almost like alive as an ingredient as you cook it, which is very unique versus most stuff when you cook it, it kind of heats up. Yeah. Meat transforms. And so it goes through that process, which makes it so unique in cuisines and so diverse in cuisines and how you can put it in so many different things. And so I think there's a lot of those pieces that really resonates with consumers. And the biggest challenge that we have is most people have had that experience that I've had, where you go and you try something from the plant-based world and you're like, oh, well, I'm not doing that again. And so we kind of call it like the plant-based anxiety, as you've tried something from plants, it doesn't taste good, and now you're much more skeptical to go back. But what I hear all the time when people try Impossible for the first time is, I never thought I could eat vegetarian until I had Impossible.
Yeah.
I never thought I could do this. And now I was like, no, it's better for the environment. 96% less land, 89% less greenhouse gas emissions, 87% less water. It has all the nutrients I'm looking for, all the protein, no cholesterol, lower saturated fat, all the vitamins I'm looking for. And it's better for the environment. It's all this stuff across the board, and it makes it an easy choice for consumers.
Yeah. And that's a very interesting point you raise. I come from South Africa, and braaiing, so barbecuing, is such a massive part of our culture here. We
Yeah.
literally have a whole day dedicated to braaiing. It's called Braai Day. So, and I was very much the same. I used to have like mushroom burgers, and I was like, I don't like the texture. It's not like meat. And then honestly, I had an Impossible Burger, and I was like, this is what I've been waiting for. This makes making that transition to meat free or eating less meat so much easier. So it's very interesting that you talk about the transformation of meats, because I think that maybe makes people feel a lot more comfortable with eating Impossible. So you've actually answered my next question, which was, to what do you attribute the success of Impossible Foods? Is there anything else that you would add to that, or would you say it's mostly like the experience and the transformation of the meat?
Well, I'd actually, take the success back a pretty far step backwards, which is the approach.
Okay.
So for us, the biggest piece of the success, or that what really drove our success, is that we looked at this and said, if we follow traditional food, design practices, like what I would have done at General Mills when I was designing products, we would end up with a better veggie burger. And what Pat, our founder, said is, that's not good enough. We have to appeal to the most avid meat lover, and we have to create products that are better than what animals can do.
Yeah.
So what that forced us to do is it forced us to build a new platform. And so out of the first 50 scientists that we hired, very, very few came with any food experience. It was always molecular biologists, biochemists, material scientists, really fundamental researchers. So we could look at food a different way to design a much better system that can create better products, more sustainable systems, and then much better supply chains as we go. And so I think that fundamental approach, that number one, our bar is the avid meat lover, nothing else matters. Two, and the only way to do that is build a platform that's never been done before in food. And that enabled us to create things and create knowledge. Like, as an example, one of the key parts of our platform for meats is we learned that, the flavor generation and creation as you cook meat is extremely complex. There's hundreds to thousands of different molecules that are created as you cook, and that's part of that transformation process. And we can identify every single one of them coming off. And so you can say this one smells like this, and it's this molecule. And if we wanted to try to replicate that and put each one in one by one, it'd be very costly, very complex, and certainly not scalable. But since we're taking such a deep research approach, as a team dug deeper, we learned that there's one protein in meat, a protein called myoglobin, which is a heme protein. And it drives all that chemistry as you cook. So now we actually have a really simple way to drive the same chemistry that's happening with meat as you cook. And so heme proteins, whether it's hemoglobin in our blood, myoglobin in muscle, leg hemoglobin, which is what we use that's found in soybeans, we produce with fermentation, that heme is identical. So all that exact same flavor chemistry happens with Impossible, just like it happens in meat, with a simple solution. And those are the types of things that really enable us to create products that meat lovers love.
So having said that, and I know you've answered this before, but I see that there's some criticism about not just Impossible, but alternative proteins in general, that it's very processed. How would you respond to that?
Yeah, I think there's good reasons why processed food have a bad rap in society. There's a lot of bad processed foods that are, good for taste, but not good for health or nutrition, or really don't have much that they offer there. There's also a lot of really, really good foods that go through processes, and pretty much every food goes through a process. And so if you look at Impossible, we are really proud of the process that we use to essentially take plants and transform them into meat. Now, the meat system is the process, of the cow is a process that we use as a manufacturing center to take plants and convert them into meat. Well, the cow takes plants and converts them into a cow. Then we take that cow and convert that cow into meat. Sure. And now if you look at the process of that versus the process, that we run, I mean, we have on our website, videos and of the entire process that we run, because it's actually really simple and is really well thought out. And then we can design it and put the right proteins, the right, fats, the right nutrients in our product that consumers want and that are, good for nutrition, and leave the things out that you don't want. And so you can really create, better systems if you're really thoughtful about it. And if we look even back at our founding, so Dr. Brown, he's a MD, PhD. So we've always had the medical scientific lens kind of coming together from the start. And so that was always designed into how we thought about this and how we wanted to create not just better products to, reduce environmental impact, which is huge, but also products that are, better from a nutritional standpoint as we go too.
Sure. Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you for clearing that up. Again, I know that you had answered that. I just kind of wanted to discuss that with our audience tonight. So I read a news article that said that Impossible recently reduced its wholesale costs by 15%. So can you tell us how you were able to do this? And I think more importantly, what it means for consumers?
Yeah, we're really excited to continue to drop our prices as we scale. The biggest thing that enables this is scaling.
Mm.
And so if we look at the meat consumption in the world, there's more than 700 billion pounds of meat consumed per year.
Wow.
And so it's growing very quickly.
Mm.
And for us, obviously, we're not in the billions of pounds of meat consumed quite yet from Impossible. So we're small compared to that. But the whole system's been optimized for animal nutrition to feed that system. Now, the opportunity comes in where you look at a beef cow, and a beef cow is about a 3% efficient technology of taking plants and converting them into meat. And so we have a huge, huge starting advantage by starting with plants, and we don't use the animal that is really made to live and burns most of those calories and most of those nutrients. And so then the question comes in is, can you take those with, now instead of being 3% efficient, you can be, order of magnitude 20, 30 times more efficient than that and convert it into something that people like better. When we're at small scale, your costs are going to be higher because you just don't have scale yet. And then as we continue to scale, our costs are coming down very, very fast. And as we do that, what we do is we pass it on to consumers and the whole value chain. And I think for a business, it's really important to have a profitable value chain as early as you can, because that then incentivizes everybody to grow through the whole system. It incentivizes us and incentivizes distributors, restaurant operators, retailers, and then also investors to put money in because they can see that growth with the financials behind it too. And so what we're seeing as we continue to drop prices, consumers are getting more and more excited. And so typically when you launch products, you get the early adopters that are like, oh, this is cool, fun, exciting. They help us start building the brand. And then as you drop price, you start hitting more in the mass market. And so in the last 12 months, we've actually dropped prices 3 times. So beginning of last year, we dropped about 15% in wholesale. And then this year, in January, we dropped 15% in wholesale and food service. And then most recently, we dropped more than 20% in retail.
Oh, wow.
And that's all by really based on hitting economies of scale. The technology platform continues to develop as well. And that's going to continue to happen as we scale up and we scale up globally.
Okay. So COVID, that didn't impact your supply chain at all? Or if it did, you clearly found a way to work around that?
Yeah, I think everyone has to adapt. The good thing about the plant-based supply chain, if you think about the length of the supply chain, and so in the animal ecosystem, you have plants that then a cow eats that lives for anywhere from 16 to say 40 months. And then you have to take the animal and then process it for food. For Impossible, you have plants, you convert it into meat. You don't have that step that takes so long. And so you can be much more flexible in what you do. So the lag in the supply chain is much shorter, which enables us to pivot more. Now, if what we did do in COVID is we were vast majority in food service when COVID hit. So when we went to market, back to the question of, what the challenges that we had is we knew that the plant-based anxiety would be a big challenge. So we went to chefs and restaurants first. It started with the most avid meat-loving chefs in the world. If those people are serving Impossible, they're going to, get people excited and say, okay, if David Chang and Tracy Desjardins are serving Impossible, that can't be a veggie burger. That must be something different. And it worked. And so we built up this really strong food service business, but we had just launched retail right before COVID hit. And so what we ended up doing last year is a lot of our supply chain and our business then, we really doubled down on retail. And so we went from 150 retail doors to more than 17,000 last year. And that was in about 9 months.
Wow.
And so that's like the idea. Yeah.
That's insane. So, I mean, obviously last year, it sounds like you had a fantastic year. So this year, do you have plans to expand further, or, are you kind of just nurturing the markets that you've got right now?
Oh, we always have lots of plans to expand. There's no shortage of ambition at Impossible. Like our founder's mission is like, we want to produce every product that consumers get from animals today we intend to create products that beat it. Number one, in sensory and experience, two, nutrition, and three, as we continue to scale, as we're talking about affordability. Then what that does, it makes it a very easy choice for consumers globally to transition to a plant-based ecosystem, which then leads to the massive environmental savings that we have.
Yeah.
And so for us, that's our ambition long-term. And we hear it from our founder every day. And so that drives the vision to what we really want to do. Now, you always have to take step by step. And so last year was a huge year where we did do a lot of work in retail. We launched a second product in retail. We'll have more products coming in retail this year. Last year, we also launched the Canadian market. So our markets right now, US is where we started. Very shortly after we launched the US, we launched here in Hong Kong.
Okay.
We were probably in hundreds of restaurants total when we launched Hong Kong. And it was because 44% of meat is consumed in Asia. And so for us to have the environmental impact that we need to have, we knew we had to tackle the Asian markets and start learning about the Asian markets early. And so we started building up Hong Kong and Macau and Singapore as learning bases. So we could learn about the culture, learn about how our product behaved in different cuisines, different cooking styles, learn about what other products we need to make that we might not be as familiar with. And so even when we went from Impossible 1.0 to Impossible 2.0, a lot of the learnings that we took about the product adaptations came from Hong Kong, because we needed to make it much more robust. Where in the US, it's like the US is such a burger heavy market. And so like, I think I've heard statistics that people say there's the average person in the US eats 3 burgers a week.
Wow.
And it's like, so, which is, with McDonald's and all those Burger King, like people like that, it's like, it is such a burger heavy culture. And here it's like you have everything. You have, Cantonese cuisines, obviously, but then you have all global cuisines, all the fusions between global cuisines. And so what we learned is our product needed to be much more robust to be able to cook anything. And so Impossible 2.0 really solved those issues. And so now it can be cooked in anything, whether it be a meatball that you boil to a dumpling to burgers and really satays. It's kind of really fun to see what people do.
So just a question for me. Any plans to expand to Africa anytime soon?
Great question. The funny thing is, so when we first launched, it'll be 5 years this summer. The biggest question we got is, when can I get it in my city?
Yes.
And so in food service. Then once we had food service kind of expanded, it's like, when can I take it home? When can I get it in my house? Now that we have retail expanded, now all the biggest question is, when can I get in my country? And so a big part, and that's really the expansion too, is I think our global businesses are going to be growing very fast. Now, specifically for Africa and a lot of the other places now, we don't have any timing to announce. I think there is going to be, a huge need. If you look at the projections of increased meat consumption, Africa is one of the places where they predict meat consumption is going to increase the highest in the next, 10, 20 years. And so what that is, it's for us, it's always going to replacing meat consumption with plant-based. It also goes to, where meat consumption is going to grow, prevent that from happening. And, put us there essentially as now we're the aspirational product that consumers are desiring. And so we don't have a timing for Africa that I can tell you today, but it definitely will be on the roadmap.
Okay, very, very exciting for me. So Nick, are you at liberty? You mentioned that you are going to be launching other products this year. I don't know, sorry, if this is in the public domain. Are you at liberty to tell us what products are going to be available this year?
We are not at liberty to say that right now.
Okay.
So nothing that has been announced in the public so far for the new products, but there's a lot of fun innovation. I would say after I moved to Hong Kong last January, so quite an interesting time to move to Hong Kong, about 2 weeks before COVID hit. But I moved here because, like I said, Asia is 44% of global meat consumption. For us to really build the international businesses and put all the effort in, it made a lot of sense for me to be here. The downside of moving here is that I don't get to be in the research labs as often. You don't get to try all the new products and creations that everyone does like on a daily basis. And so I hear all the stories of our researchers and doing like, oh, we have this new prototype of X or Y or Z. And I'm like, oh, I just want to try it. But I get to see some cool pictures. So we have a lot of fun things from the platform, because even the first 2 years, like the platform, we weren't targeting products. It was really for the first 2 years, build a system that can replace animals.
Yeah.
And then about 2 years in, we decided that ground beef would be the first target, because it is a huge global category, huge environmental impact. It was strategic. It's iconic in so many cultures, whether it be beef Wellington to a burger to really anything, meat pies. And so every culture has ground meat that is really iconic in culture. And so then it was a good starting point. But then, since then our team has been designing all kinds of stuff. So a lot coming. Unfortunately, I can't tell you exactly what right now, but you'll see.
Very exciting. So Nick, I'm just wondering, so you said that it took 2 years to create the ground beef. So if you were to create other products like, I don't know, chicken products or pork products, would you be starting from zero, or do you kind of work off what you've done with beef, for example? So would it take 2 years to create a chicken product?
Yeah, great question. So if we go through the history, the first 2 years, we weren't doing any product, not even ground beef.
Yeah.
It was just technology essentially to build a platform. Then about roughly at the 2-year anniversary, we decided that ground beef would be the first target, and we started really real product development. And then 3 years later, we launched our first product.
Wow.
And so we can say that we were more than 5 years into the company's history before we even launched a product into the market. And at that point, we launched it in one restaurant at only at lunch. And so this is the kind of the idea of also what made Impossible successful is we didn't force commercialization early to put a product in market until we knew it could compete with meat from an animal. Because that's what we have to change, and that's the mindset that we have to disconnect with. The only way I can get meat is from animals. We create meat from plants that can all compete meat from animals.
Yeah.
Now, really, everything that we've learned about meat and the flavor and the texture and everything else applies to all the other meat categories. And a lot of the stuff we've learned even applies to like eggs and fish and dairy and other products like that. Because it's really the fat and protein science and how everything works together to create products that consumers love, and the flavor systems that get created as you heat and you cook and things like that. And so if you look at, we can go back to the example of heme. So heme is really prevalent in red meat, and that's what makes it darker. Heme is also in chicken, it's also in pork, it's also in everything else. And that flavor chemistry is different between the concentration of heme and how much is in there and the nutrients around it. But the general idea of what's happening is the same. And so a lot of that is like you have to tweak and you have to change stuff to get the right flavors. The fats might be different for the mouthfeel and texture. And so it's more tweaks from the platform to go from ground beef to ground pork, which we did a preview of our ground pork product on last year that consumers loved. At the Consumer Electronics Show. And so that's a product that'll be much bigger in Asia than it is in a market like the US. Then you can take that to chicken too. Then the next step is you look at structure. And so ground is like the easiest thing you could probably do is make essentially like a hot dog, like because essentially it's like really kind of emulsified. There's not that much texture to it really. And then ground beef, it is complicated because it's used in so many dishes in different ways. So that is a big, really hard technical challenge. The next technical challenge is a full cut. And so the platform is really developed to do anything from the ground or even like a hot dog all the way to full cuts. But the technical challenges are different. But there's a lot of pieces that relate between different platforms of different animals.
Okay, fascinating, Nick. So okay, now we're going to move a bit more broad. So how do you think, if you think at all, the food industry is changing as a whole to become more environmentally friendly?
I think it is changing in a few ways. The first way I'm going to start with is really what typically drives change in industry and something like food is consumers are demanding it. Possible in 2016, if you look at the purchase drivers for why you'd buy plant-based meat, number one is it has to taste amazing. That's always number one. Two is I want something nutritious, like meat is a good source of protein, it's nutrient dense, it's filling. And then you go all the way to the bottom, and it was sustainability. Now, when you do those same surveys in the US, number one is still has to be delicious. Two is nutrition. Three is sustainability. And so consumers are starting to change, and consumers have shown willingness to pay for sustainability. Consumers want to buy products that they feel good about and they feel good are doing good for the world. And so I think that is now driving the industries to change. And you can see this across the board, and you can look at the plant-based meat industry, and many of the traditional meat companies are, whether they've rebranded themselves protein companies and they have their own plant-based brands and things like this. And so whether you're big companies or small companies, people are looking at it and saying, this isn't a fad, this is something that needs to happen. This is something that's going to happen.
Yeah.
The only way we can have the meat, fish, and dairy foods that we love is to produce them a better way. So there's no way we can scale because typically when people's income goes up, you eat more animal products. Populations are increasing. And so we're already at the point where we use 45% of the world's land surface. It doesn't work. The only way we can do this is create a system that's much more sustainable, much more efficient. And the only way to do that is using plant-based foods. Yeah. And so I think a lot of the industry is starting to see this, and the consumers are starting to hear about it. And like, even if we went back 10 years ago, no one was talking about this. I was in the food industry my entire life. I'd never heard about like the inefficiencies of that system. And then I look at this, and I'm in solar energy. It's a 10-15% efficient solar cell, and like, that's horrible efficiency. But you're trying to get it better. And then I find out a cow is 3% efficient. I'm like, wait, what? There's no technologies that we use that are 3% efficient. And that's what drives the environmental footprint of that.
Yeah.
And so now that consumers in the world is becoming much more aware of this, as I have over the last 10 years, it's driving change.
Okay. Yeah, well, I mean, it is really encouraging to hear that. So in a recent interview, Bill Gates said that rich nations should switch entirely to plant-based meats, even fingering Impossible as a trailblazer in this area. But I can imagine that interview really rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. So what do you think about that statement? Do you think it is firstly realistic? And what is your opinion on it?
The way we look at it is our job is to create products that make it an easy choice for consumers to make.
Yeah.
And the way you do that is you create products that deliver an amazing experience first, because food is an experience, food is culture.
Yeah.
2 is you create products that have good nutrition. People are looking for nutrition. Like every year, people make more choices on nutrition and health than they did the year before, typically. 3 then comes to affordability. And so as we continue to make products, and then of course sustainability, which is our mission, that now, as I said, consumers are like going up that pole and how much they're actually choosing plant-based products for. So you look at all 4 of those and you optimize this, and you make products that taste better, are more nutritious, much more sustainable, which is the easy part, and then more affordable as we scale, as we talked about efficiency. Now that makes it an easy choice for consumers anywhere.
Yeah.
Now, typically, if you look at different nations and economic classes, as you go through the cost curve of new technologies, the early scale, it's going to be typically the people with more money that are going to be able to afford the products, because as you start a new technology, your products start a little bit higher, but it's still within the sphere. And so, I mean, we're competitive within the meat, the ground meat category. And it's a place that, as we're dropping prices, you can see that we make money, our distributors make money, our customers make money, which, like I said, is very important for the whole system to advance. And then you drop those prices, and then it gets more and more available to the mass markets. That's how you drive the change. And once that happens, we're really confident that it's going to come to the point where it's like, why would I want a product from animals? It doesn't taste as good. It's more expensive, and it's way less sustainable. And it makes it a really easy choice for consumers as we develop.
Sure. So actually that leads perfectly into my next and last question. So given its current trajectory, where do you think the landscape of alternative proteins will be, say, 5 years from now?
Probably a lot farther than we can imagine. So I think the other thing I've realized too is typically it takes a lot longer for new technologies to catch up to incumbents than we ever think it's going to. And there's example after that of that. Now, it also, once it does, there's tons of examples of how fast it moves after. And you look at anything from like my mobile phone sitting here, that's a smartphone, and you go from landlines to cellulars to smartphones. And when the smartphone came in, there was a little bit of adoption right away, but it really hadn't caught up in performance yet, and it wasn't good. And then, iPhone and others came out, and the performance went up. And within 10 years, the whole industry flipped. And no one saw that coming that fast. But once the product was better, consumers changed really, really fast. Other companies came into the ecosystem really fast to help push it. And I think that's what we're starting to see in plant-based. You're starting to see this where all the way down the ecosystem, from farmer to consumer, companies along there are looking, okay, how can I play a part of this? How can I play a big part in driving this change? Now that products are catching up to what consumers want from an experience standpoint. So I think in the next 5 years, compared to where we are today, if we went back 5 years ago from today to today, it's totally different. Like, no one was talking about this 5 years ago. And now like it's a global trend that's not going to stop. Now that it's still just getting started. So 5 years from now, where it's going to be, it's going to be exciting. We'll put it that way.
It is very exciting. And what a lovely, like, hopeful tone to end the interview on. Thank you, Nick. So I'm just going
You're
to
welcome.
take about 5 seconds to just get the questions from the audience. Have a lot of questions. Yeah, the audience has been very involved, which is fantastic to see. Okay, so first question from Tristan. What is it about Impossible Foods branding that has set it apart from other plant-based food providers?
I think there's a bunch of things. The first thing starts with the product, even before you get to the brand, because the product enables the brand. So anytime you're creating a brand, and the way I would look at it is, the brand itself, especially in a new brand, is kind of an empty vessel that you have to fill.
Yeah.
And it can mean a lot of different things to consumers and where it can go. I think it turned out really well. We actually did a lot of work to come up with the name Impossible. We're a company started by scientists. We'll say it wasn't the first name that we got to, but once we got to Impossible, it represented a ton of what we were looking to do. Everybody thought it was impossible to do what we were doing.
Yeah.
Impossible is very memorable. Impossible has an edge to it, and for us, like, we're a company that has an edge to us, and so it's something that I think people can really gravitate to in a name.
Yeah.
And then what we did is we made it very approachable, and said, this is meat from plants that will outcompete and is competing head on head with meat from animals now. You don't have to have it, but try it. We know you'll like it. And so then it's really about trial and experience and like letting people make that choice, and it's very welcoming. And then our design teams, our marketing, our creative, our communications teams have done an amazing job of like driving education, driving excitement, starting with chefs. And our sales team even started with chefs like Chris Cosentino, David Chang, and Mei Chow here in Hong Kong, and others. It's like, it's people that really tie into culture, tie into food culture, that see the story, see what we're driving as an environmental impact and a positive story for the world, and they want to jump on and help us. And so I think all of that comes together to really help create the brand and the movement of what Impossible means and what Impossible is going to drive forward.
Yeah, I will say, just looking at the branding, you guys have really kind of carved out a space for yourselves. I mean, you see the branding and it's like Impossible, that's you guys, which I think is so incredible for any product to do, but definitely a product like yours. So yeah, I mean, I love the branding. So next question coming from Mark. I've heard that plant-based meats are high in sodium. What's your view on that?
Yeah, that's a common question that we'll get. So Impossible, we're not a high sodium product, but it does have more sodium than beef unseasoned. Because typically, beef and pork and products like that, when they're unseasoned, they don't have a lot of sodium. And that's where when you cook meat, and if you go to a restaurant and you have a meat dish, they're actually typically pretty highly seasoned, because the salt essentially starts bringing out those flavors and aromas and everything else that you cook. Salt is a very useful tool in the cooking process. And so I think you'd have to eat more than 1.5 pounds or almost 1 kilogram of Impossible to hit your sodium limit in a day. You should never eat that much of any product in a day, to say the least. So it's like, it's not a high sodium product, but it is higher than meat just because meat doesn't have much. And so, we, even from Impossible 1.0 to 2.0, though, we did reduce sodium. It's something, consumers were asking for. We'll continue to look at ways to make the product more sustainable. And that's one of the big differences, where a cow is a cow. It's going to continue to produce the same products. Every year we get better. And this is across sustainability, across nutrition, across affordability, taste, flavor, across the board. And so we're just getting started, and we're competing head on head right now in experience. And things like nutrition, where we have no cholesterol, no hormones, no antibiotics. We have just as much protein, less fat, all the vitamins and minerals you're looking for in meat. And then sodium is one thing that is higher, just because meat doesn't really have much until you season it. But it's not a high sodium product by any means.
Okay. Thank you, Nick. And thank you, Mark, for that question. Next question coming from Nicole. What are you looking for in a distributor abroad? So what are your key qualities?
Yeah, that's a great question too. So we're looking for partners when we look at building sales systems. I think we're such a mission-led, mission-first company that's the start of honestly, any sales conversation with distributors or food service and retail customers. It's like, this is what we're trying to do. This is what we stand for. This is the positive impact on the world that we want to drive and how we want to reach your consumers. And so I think we want to create a much more than just a transactional relationship. Typically, we want to look at, how do we build a business together that can have a huge positive impact on the world? Then it'll depend on what we're trying to tackle. And in some markets like the US, the system is you want to have every distribution point you possibly can. So there are hundreds and hundreds of distributors that carry Impossible. In small markets, sometimes that's not the way the dynamics work, and then you try to find the distributor or two that you'd want to work with initially that access the right customers in food service. You might have different ones for retail or e-commerce, and so you kind of look at, okay, what channels are we trying to hit? Make sure we align on the mission, and then you look at the economics too and make sure the economics work.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Nicole, for that. So next question is from Bavik. Sorry, I hope I'm saying that correctly. Of the many ways in which this product could have been described, how did you arrive at plant-based meat terminology? Did that name exist when you started? Oh, sorry. Yeah. Did that name exist when you started? Were there any other alternative descriptions considered?
Yeah, man, this is going back. This was a debate for sure. And I mean, we knew very, very quickly that the term like veggie burger and things like that were so connected to poor experiences for a meat eater, that we had to have something that described a product that really could better appeal to the meat loving consumer. I honestly don't remember all the names we talked about. We talked about a lot of different ways to do this. And I think this is one of them that really stuck with the team and said, I could think this like sounds more inviting. It describes more of what we're doing. We're using plants to make meat a better way. And so it really matched the product really well. And I think over time, then it just started gaining more and more momentum internally. And then as we went to market, it really started resonating with consumers. I'd have to go back. I wonder if I have anything in like the other name, like I guess kind of like catchphrases, I guess you could say, in this that describes it that we had, but we had a lot of ideas.
I would love to see that, from like non-creatives like scientists. I would love to see what you guys came up with.
Yeah, I have a lot of stories on that. So it's fun. It's actually the fun part about putting people with really different walks of life in a room and seeing what happens.
100%.
And so I think that's where, like the science side, at first it wasn't even food; it was other types of science. Then you bring the food scientists in, and who have the very different skill sets. You have people coming in from fashion. We have people coming in from tech, and all these different experiences lead to different types of creation.
No, I certainly get that. Just from the overall messaging and branding of Impossible, I can definitely see that you've got a lot of hats working on this. So the next question from Cora. Over the 9 years that you have been with Impossible, seeing the growth of the company and development of its products, what have been and what are the key data indicators to demonstrate that the direction towards plant-based meat alternatives is something of true intrinsic value and positive impact to both the environment and humanity? Oh, thank you for that, Cora.
I think the first, I guess the last part of like the benefit to environment and humanity is like every time somebody chooses Impossible over meat from an animal, it's a positive environmental impact. And that goes with the sustainability numbers that I gave before. When we do our data tracking, our most detailed data tracking is in the US, where the systems are pretty robust, and it's our biggest market. But the vast majority of our consumers and the vast majority of our product purchase is at a direct replacement of meat from an animal. And so out of that, it's a really direct conversion of meat from animal over to Impossible. So that's the most direct, I would say, from an impact standpoint. We are still young in our growth in that sense, and I think what we see of positive signs going forward is our retail business, which we really kicked off last year in full earnest. Every week, every month is a record month, and so it's continued to expand. We continue to add doors. We continue to increase velocity on a per door basis. And then as we add more products, we're going to continue to see that go up because consumers are looking for more variety as you go too. And I think it's like all the metrics show that it's an upward trend everywhere for our food service and our retail businesses, and like a store and a per store basis and overall. And so I think that to me is just really encouraging. And that's, with the products we have today versus the products that are only going to get better and better and better. And then consumers come over, because for food, food number one always still comes into the experience that you have. If you have a good experience and then it means something and you feel good about it too, then you just come back over and over and over again.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you for that, Cora. And then another question from Mark. What is your view on the success of other plant-based proteins like pork, chicken, etc., which don't have as big of a carbon footprint, so it's more difficult to drive home the sustainability message?
Yeah, I think the reason we started with beef is from an overall scaled, big scaled system, the most inefficient.
Yes.
And then it's the most environmentally taxing. And so you go next and you go from beef, which is 3% efficient, then you get to pork and milk, which are more closer to about a 10% efficiency. And then you get to chicken, which I believe is more like a 15% efficiency. So as you go down that, you kind of, for us, is like beef is the most inefficient, start there. Then you go to pork, which, like I said, we had a preview of Impossible ground pork products. That's the next inefficient. So it's almost like a worse to better, not good, but better terminology and like strategy. Now you still look at that. You still look at those efficiencies. There's not many technologies and products in the world that have that poor of efficiency of even something like a chicken. And so is stark as a cow? No, but is there a lot of room for improvement and almost an order of magnitude of room for improvement? Yes. And so it's not as stark of a contrast to what we need to do, but there's a huge sustainability drive across all platforms that come from animals, because animals they're not made to create food for humans. They're typically made to live. And then now we've essentially built these scaled systems to use them that way. But they're not efficient. And so now that we're creating better processes across the board that are much more efficient, as long as we create products that consumers like better, then the systems can change and the environmental impact is right behind it.
Okay, thank you, Mark, for that. Another question from Mandy. Thank you for the explanation of sodium content in alternative proteins. Just wondering, apart from sodium content and carbon emissions from cross-border transportation, are there any other unintended consequences in this space that you are aware of or that consumers should consider?
Unintended consequences. I think we've done a lot of thinking on the systems effects that you can drive through everything. And you can say, when new technologies come in and you change systems overall, what you're going to directly affect is not all that you're going to affect. Of course, all the systems around it are also going to change. And so I think there's a lot of things that we want to help advance, along with Impossible's mission around environmental sustainability. Mm-hmm. I think the positive side is what we try to drive. I think unintended, I think the goal would be make any unintended intended, and try to uncover what those could be and try to tackle them. I think it's early in the journey of scalability. As we continue to scale supply chains, our job is really to go eventually and hopefully quite soon down to the farm level and say, okay, what are the best ways to farm from a sustainability standpoint? Now the first is efficiency. The more efficient we can be using the crop, instead of the soybean going to a pig, the soybean would go into like a burger. You're going to create a big environmental impact directly, just because you're so much more efficient. You need less land. Now there's also a lot of other benefits that we can drive through now taking this in the intense push on land to produce more and more and more. Now we can think about how we can use land more effectively, not just efficiently, because right now we can only look at efficiency because we need the land to produce, to feed 7.5 billion and more people as they come. Yeah. But I think it's a good question. I think unintended consequences is something that we will continue to think about, and making sure we can make all unintended consequences intended, and then you can build systems that can solve any challenges that we run into.
Yeah, so thank you for that question, Mandy. I hope that also kind of encourages us as consumers to more carefully choose the products that we purchase. So a question from Daniela. What markets do you think have the most staticity and are difficult to expand in for brands like Impossible?
Most difficult to expand in? Ooh, I think every market has their own difficulty. Sure. I think I don't know if I wanted to pick on the country. I don't know. I think there's countries that are known really for food culture and this is the way it's done. And I think those are going to be harder. It's interestingly enough, a lot of the ones that are heavier in meat production and meat culture are some of the ones that are moving the fastest. And so you look at the US is moving very fast, Australia, we hear a lot about how fast it's moving. I hear a lot about how fast Brazil is starting to move, and even countries like Germany. And it's like a lot of the ones that you wouldn't expect are going to be some of the leaders in this, just because it's so like deeper into the, you know, the traditional meat system, are some of the ones that are actually moving the fastest. And so I think, you know, the ones that might be a little harder too are, you know, this is more the socioeconomic side as you get more into the developing nations, where it's less about moving to a more sustainable system and more about, you know, we just need to have the nutrients that we need to survive and to thrive.
Yeah.
And so that's going to be one of the first things that you have to solve. And then our job as we get there is going to create products that give them, you know, the nutrients that they need to thrive while making it sustainable and affordable. And so I think that's going to be a key part to these platforms as we scale globally to, you know, reach a lot of developing nations too, which right now it's a little less accessible there.
Sure. Okay, so there's actually two questions that kind of go in together. So Joanna asks, what's your strategy, timeline, and challenges to enter the Chinese market?
Yeah, so a big reason I'm here in Hong Kong would certainly be the mainland China market. It's around 27% of global meat is consumed in China.
Wow.
And so it's, you know, like you could say about like half roughly half per person in a country like the US. And then obviously you have a lot more people. But it's, you know, that's increased a lot and pretty much from very, very little 40 years ago to what it is today.
Yeah.
And so it's changed a lot and there's a lot of challenges behind that. So for us, I think the need is there clearly. I think we've been always looking at, you know, in something like the Impossible ground pork product is, you know, looking with a very close eye in the, you know, mainland China market, because this is where that market is very, very large.
Yeah.
I think as we get in, you know, we're learning right now on what it's going to take to succeed. It's very early, and I'd say the movement there is probably starting in the last 6 to 12 months. But I also hear a lot of, when we're seeing a lot of this is as it started to move really fast. So I think it's going to be a really, obviously a very, very important market. I think it's going to be a really interesting market too. I think like a place like China too is, I think one of the guys on my team who had been working in China for a long time said, like, you can't look at China as China. You have to look at China as Europe. And so every part of China is different for cuisine, culture, and what you need to do. Whether it be like Italy, France, and the UK, looking at, you know, Guangzhou, Shanghai, Beijing, Chengdu, like they're all different. And we have to look at them differently versus approaching it like, you know, one country, one culture. Because there's so many cultures that are, you know, come together in a place like China, especially in the food side. And so I think it's gonna be really important for us as we go into, you know, accept that and then say, is like our product itself is ground meats right now. And so you can turn that into any cuisine and then look at it, you know, how do we actually tailor the product offering with the, you know, local partners, local manufacturers and customers to the local cuisines that really resonate and drive the impact with consumers there.
Okay. Okay, thank you for that question, Joanna. And our last question, another one from Cora. Do you have a favorite impossible recipe to share with us?
Impossible recipe. Well, I would say the one I probably do the most, it's probably tacos. I love creating tacos and like fajitas, burritos, stuff like that. I would say the one I probably cook the most is like when you're talking about South African, like grilling all the time.
Yeah.
When I was back in Minnesota, I pretty much grilled every day of the year, including winter, when it'd be like -10 Fahrenheit outside. And so I've definitely grilled a lot of burgers and different things. But I'd say for me, I like tacos, burgers. Created mapo tofu the other day, so that was a newer one for me. It's fun to explore and try new things. They did meatballs recently. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff I think for cooking. I think there's one of our launch partners in Singapore. The dish was an Impossible Wellington.
Oh wow!
And it is delicious. It is so good, and I think it sells. It sells very well. I don't know if it outcompetes the beef one, but very, very close if it doesn't. And I think that's also, you know, when you're talking about trends where the, you know, seeing this is where this is going to go, there are places where, you know, we fully outsell, you know, ground beef from a cow. And when we did our retail launch, we launched in 28 stores in LA. And for the first 10 days, we outsold the entire ground beef category in those 28 doors.
That's amazing.
And it shows the demand and the excitement for this by consumers, and it is LA and it was our first launch, but it's like, it was so exciting to see that because it just shows that, people are looking for something better.
Yeah. Well, yeah, let's hope that that trend continues, and especially with COVID, I think it's kind of shone a light on how inefficient our relationship with nature and animals are. So, thank you so much for joining us, Nick, and thank you so much everybody for joining us, and thank you for being so involved and asking all these insightful questions. So that concludes our interview. Thank you so much for joining us, and please check out Impossible's products because no sponsor, but I love it. It's so great. Impossible. Can't wait to come back to Hong Kong to have it again, or have it come to Africa, whichever comes first. Yeah, so, and please check out earth.org and please see the events that we're going to be having in the future. Nick, thank you so much for your time again, and please keep well. Okay, bye.